Okay, this is an OMG for classification. So let's have a little look at what sentences we could use for this if it comes up in the exam. So let's talk about the 5 kingdoms. As we know, there are 5 kingdoms: the animal, plant, prokaryote, fungi and protists. Okay, so know the animal, plant kingdom, and we look at that really well. We just need to know the other 3, that there is 5 in total. We also then know that we have animals, and animals can be split into vertebrates and invertebrates. And as you can see here, vertebrates are animals with a backbone, and invertebrates are animals without a backbone, which you'll need to be able to define, because they do ask that for a quick 1-mark question. Then plants can also be classified into whether they are flowering and non-flowering plants. We can also look at the definition of classification. So what is classification? It is sorting organisms, because it's not just animals, into groups according to their similarities. Okay. Then we know we have our binomial system. Okay, this comes up every year, so I would learn this. If it comes up, you just need to say, why do we use it? We use it because it is universal and it avoids confusion. And we do it because it's in Latin. It's the same name everywhere we go. And if they give you a table and they ask of all the organisms of the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, you need to know which one is the binomial system, and we use the categories of the genus and the species. And if we can remember, the genus needs to be in a capital letter and the species in a lowercase letter. So then we move on to an adaptation. They can ask you to define an adaptation. So it's a characteristic that enables an organism to survive in a particular environment. So for example, we could look at a polar bear, and we know a polar bear's got really thick fur to keep it warm. It's got small ears to reduce heat loss, and it's got a layer of fat underneath to keep warm. Also has white fur so it can camouflage from predators. Then we have competition, and the 2 types of competition what we need to know. We've got intra-specific and inter-specific competition. Intra-specific competition is competition between the same species. And then inter-specific is competition between different species. So animal competition, then we've got shelter, food, water, dominance and territory. Mainly things that territory could go between different species. Shelter, food is competition. We look at resources for intra and inter-specific competition. Plant competition, then plants also compete even though they can't move, but they will compete for water, minerals, light and space that they have. In an exam then, they could ask you to define biodiversity, and biodiversity is the number of different species living in a particular environment. So the more species live in there, the more biodiverse it is, and essentially the healthier, the better the environment is. Then we've got quadrats, and we know quadrats, okay? We went out in the field, or we didn't go out in the field, but we could go out in the field to do it. And it's for slow-moving populations, so for like slugs, or for populations that don't move, and we look at the daisy. So for the method, first thing you need to do, you need to randomly place the quadrat, okay? You can't decide where you're going to place it. You need to randomly place your quadrat in the field. Then you count the number of daisies in your quadrat, and you're going to repeat that 10, 15 times, depending on how big your area is you were looking at. Then you're going to calculate the mean number of daisies, for example. So if you did the quadrat 10 times, you would calculate the mean on average, how many daisies were in a quadrat. And then you would times that mean by the area of the field, and that would give you an estimate of how many daisies are in the field, for example. But we could also then look at capture, recapture, which we know is how we look at fast-moving populations. So fish in a lake, deer in a forest, things that we can't always see. And what we would do then is, you know, that we would capture the organism, we would mark it, okay, but we'd mark it to make sure it's not going to cause it to be more predated, for it to stand out, it's not going to cause harm by the animal, okay. We'd let it go, and after a couple of days, we'd bring it back, and then we would catch many again and see how many are marked up. And we would use the equation, but they give you the equation in the exam, so we haven't got to worry about that and remembering that. But there are 4 assumptions we need to make. We need to remember that there's no immigration, so no organisms move into the population. No emigration, so no animals leave the population. We also assume that there's no deaths and that there's no births. So essentially what I have said here, that we must assume that the population does not change, it stays the same. So we're assuming that on the first time we capture them, the population is whatever number it is, and a day later, 2 days later, whenever we come back to do the recapture, the population hasn't changed. Like how there has been no births and deaths in that time, okay? However, we can't just say the population doesn't change, because they can ask for 3 or 4 assumptions we must make, which are those. Okay, so that is our OMG for classification.